So tell us a little bit, we'll start kind of in the order of how you set it out. Let's talk about the government shutdown, your taxes, the IRS. How is that all working?
Yeah. So the IRS has been shut down as a result of the government shutdown. So the IRS has been closed for almost 3 weeks now. But the IRS on their own, they determined that they have the ability and the authority to process returns and issue refunds in spite of the government shutdown. So the IRS about a week ago made its own decision to go ahead and bring back a lot of its furloughed employees, a significant amount of its workforce, enough to where they can process the returns that are electronically filed, and so that they can meet that deadline or meet the opening day that they've always had, which is the last Monday in January. So this year they intend to begin accepting returns on January 28th, Monday, January 28th. So they're still going to meet that time frame. And so in spite of the government shutdown, the IRS is still going to start accepting returns on that day. So that means that they still intend to be issuing refunds about 21 days. So consistently, we've seen the IRS issuing refunds about 21 days from the time they receive an electronically filed return. States, including New Mexico, have also been consistently meeting that timetable as well. And so that's encouraging news for people that are expecting to get a refund and are maybe a little worried about the government shutdown. Is that going to slow down them getting their refunds? And so no, it's not. One exception, and this has always been the case, if you're claiming the earned income credit or the additional child tax credit, these are popular things that people claim. That delays your refund a little bit. So right now the IRS has announced that those type of refunds will be issued at the earliest February 27th.
Got it. So the first day you can file is January 28th. The last day is April 15th?
April 15th, yes. April 15th is the deadline date. You can file an extension that gives you an extension until October 15th. And so we have that time frame. 90% of tax returns are electronically filed. And so that's always the best and fastest way. So the fastest way to get your refund is 2 steps: electronically file and elect to have the refund electronically deposited in your bank account. So you provide the IRS on the tax form, you provide them the bank account routing number and bank account number. And then the IRS and the state of New Mexico does the same. And that'll get your money back the fastest. Okay. And significant changes for this year. This is the most significant tax changes we've seen in 30 years. The Trump Tax Act went into effect in 2018. And so tax returns are going to be very different this year. Hopefully easier. But states didn't follow that Trump Tax Act. So a lot of times your federal return now will be a little different than your state return. But a good example is, it's estimated that 90% of people will now take the standard deduction, because the standard deduction was doubled, okay? But on the state returns, even New Mexico, you can still claim medical. And so you may take the standard deduction on the federal, but you may turn around on the state return and still take all your medical deductions. And so it can be a very good scenario for a lot of taxpayers.
Question about that. I had a question about the IRS as well. So the IRS re-brought in some of its furloughed employees, so they're not getting, do you know if they're getting paid or not?
They haven't. I researched that, and it hasn't said if they're, I couldn't find anything that said if they're getting paid or not getting paid, but they did bring back enough of their furloughed workers to begin electronically accepting returns. But things like their 800 telephone number, that's not staffed. And so a lot of those other features are not staffed.
Got it. And let's talk a little bit more about the standard deductible. I just need a little bit more of an explanation on it, because I know you file federally and state-wise. And when you're talking about the standard deductible, if you can also talk a little bit more about that Trump tax code. Does New Mexico follow that yet? Because I know it's adopted at the federal level. So how does that look for New Mexico?
So the doubling of the standard deduction. So let's take an example. Married filing joint. So that standard deduction in the past was about $12,000. Now it's about $24,000, and so it doubled. So unless you have itemized deductions that exceed that, and the biggest parts of your itemized deductions are your home mortgage interest, your property taxes, charitable contributions, and medical. So those are your biggest parts of that itemized deductions. So if you don't exceed that, then you just take the standard deduction, which is much easier, less documentation to keep track of, things like that. New Mexico does allow that same standard deduction that has doubled, and but in addition to that, you can still come back and claim your medical expenses on a New Mexico return. And so it's very favorable in New Mexico because you kind of get the best of both worlds. And so getting started, for most people to get started doing their taxes, they simply need their W-2 from their employer and their Form 1095 from their health insurance company. And because we still have to prove we have health insurance. If we don't have health insurance, we can be subject to a penalty. And so that gets most people started. Of course, if you're a homeowner or self-employed, there are other things that you need. And then the best way to get started is Google local CPAs, and or you can go to irs.gov, IRS website, which is open for business. They have a link on there called Free File, and all the major software providers are on there, TurboTax, H&R Block, things like that. So if you meet certain criteria, which are basically income levels, you can qualify for the IRS Free File program, file for free at the federal level. You'll still be charged for state tax returns.
So is that Free File program, is that for more low-income people?
Yes.
Okay.
It's about 50,000 and under. A lot of people qualify for the Free File program, and under the new Trump Tax Act, which is easier taxes, then a lot of people will be able to use that.
Do you have any estimates of how many people here in New Mexico could benefit from that? Is that a number that's been projected yet?
No, I've never looked at that number to see how, but I would imagine a significant number of people can qualify for that.
So this Trump tax code, it didn't have an effect on last year's tax season, so this will be the first tax season that it's come into effect?
That's correct, yes.
Got it, okay.
Those things went into effect January 1 of 2018. Yes, because it was passed right at the end of 2017.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And besides that the standard deduction, are there any other big changes, especially people in New Mexico, we're gonna see?
Yeah, that's really the biggest change that most people are gonna feel. There's other things where we don't claim dependents anymore, exemptions, and so we don't go through that process anymore. And but it's really that standard deduction that is the big change.
Got it. Okay, and that'll be at the federal and state level because you're in New Mexico.
Yes.
You get that double.
Yes, you do. Yeah,
Got
you
it.
sure do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with the government shutdown, I mean, I know they're bringing in furloughed workers, but should people like watching at home try to file as early as they can to get that in sooner in the government shutdown? I mean, you always should try to get it in earlier, but especially this year when things are kind of dicey, should people be racing to get that in?
Absolutely. You should file as soon as possible because that ensures the sooner you file, the sooner you're going to see your refund. And so you always want to do that. Many of us have to wait for those W-2s and Form 1095s. Even though the IRS is closed, employers and health insurance companies still have to meet those deadlines. So employers are required to have their W-2s mailed out to employees postmarked by January 31st. Same with the health insurance companies, they have to have those 1095s postmarked by January 31st. So some people have to wait till that first week of February to file if those employers and health insurance companies are not getting those forms out until then.
Okay. I'm trying to think. Anything else you think we do? I'm trying to think if I have any follow-ups. Do you have anything else you think we need to dig in?
No, I think that we covered all that stuff.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, so that's, and I guess just, it doesn't have to be on camera, but so the IRS line, like people helping aren't there, but people going through and filing the returns are there.
Yeah.
It's pretty much all your electronic systems. And
electronic systems, and so those are the people that have been brought back so that the IRS can, they really wanted to meet that January 20th. They always opened on that last Monday in January every year,